Hello, everyone. This is Dale from the Precept classes in Cullman, Alabama, and I thank you for joining with us in our continued study. We're looking at the First Kings right now and Second Chronicles, working around the idea of a divided heart and a divided nation. And so we are at lesson number 6 right now, and what we have seen to this point in time, here's a brief synopsis of everything, is that Solomon's kingdom has been established, that Solomon built the temple as instructed by his father David and by the Lord, and that in last week's lesson we saw that God appeared to Solomon a second time, and we saw some details about Solomon's other projects. So this week's lesson is really very interesting, a lot of details, so we're going to have to go through it very quickly. In 1 Kings, the 10th chapter, and 2 Chronicles, the 9th chapter, we're introduced to the Queen of Sheba. And this is a woman, and let me just tell you some things that you can read into the word. I'm going to say that very guardedly and very carefully. Obviously, she's a leader, okay? She'd heard reports about this great man Solomon and the things that was going on. And so she decided to visit. She was absolutely amazed. As a matter of fact, she was a little deflated in a positive kind of way because she'd heard all these reports. Don't forget that she was a queen. She was a leader. We're not sure where Sheba was, but generally speaking, it was probably where modern-day Yemen is, though it may have been on the coast of Africa somewhere, or it may have been as far away as over in India, but probably on the south side of the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen. What I find really intriguing about this was that she was very, very rich, very well off, that she was a leader. You would not find that at all in that country today or anywhere in the Middle East, simply because Islam does not allow women that type of stature. Anyway, she was amazed, and there's some interesting historical things that accounts that have come out of this. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And so this woman was wise, she was wealthy, she was a leader. When she came there, she was so amazed by everything that she saw that she actually comes along and she blesses the people, said, y'all are blessed to live here, you servants and everything. And then she blesses the Most High God for placing Solomon on the throne and for all the wonder and the glorious things that occurred there. And she said, you know, I heard all this stuff, but the half has not been told about what's occurred right here. So let me just touch a little bit on some of the historical things before we go into the wealth right here. When you read some of the history books that were written by Arab nations, and Josephus refers to some things like this, some people believe, and I think that's probably true, that Solomon and this Queen of Sheba has some type of relationship. You see that she brought him tremendous gifts. He wound up reciprocating and giving her even more. Personally, I believe that he gave her a child. Okay, because there's some historical accounts. This isn't biblical, it isn't scripture, but we can learn from history. And it is said that that child is the one that wound up going into Ethiopia and really brought a close tie. Right now we know that there are Ethiopians that have Jewish lineage. Okay, they are of the Jewish line. And there are many who believe that that came about through this particular relationship. We don't know, but it is interesting. So, as to the wealth you see right here, in these verses that you read this week, there's tremendous amount of gold. The phrase was used that silver was counted to be sort of useless during this time because gold was so valued. We see all this stuff about there being the ships of Tarshish that come in, bringing peacocks and apes. And so here's what we need to know about wealth. You did a lot of cross-referencing in the scripture about this also. God is the one who gives us the power to make wealth. And a lot of times we think of wealth, we think, well, I'm not wealthy, I'm poor. Let me tell you, if you're watching this right now, if you're in any of these classes, if we know one another, we are wealthier than, what, 95% of the people in the world have ever been? We really are. And there's nothing wrong with wealth. What is wrong is when we focus upon wealth and wealth becomes consuming. It is really a heart issue. So if your pursuit is to attain wealth, you need to be very careful and take that before the Lord and forget it, okay? But if you are blessed and God has blessed us with wealth, that is a blessing of the Lord. 2 Chronicles 9 ends with Solomon's death. It actually comes up sort of quickly. But over in 1 Kings 11, we get more details about Solomon's life. And in 1 Kings 11, it says that Solomon married many foreign women. And I go, well, no joke, he really did. This was against the command of the Lord. He also allowed their false gods, and he allowed them more and more. And one of the saddest verses in all the scripture pops up right here. It says, when Solomon was old, and what he did, his heart turned away, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord. Because of all this, and because Solomon led the people away from the Lord raised up three adversaries to Solomon. The first one was Hadad, and he hated David due to what Joab had done to Edom. Hadad was an Edomite. And then Rezin of Damascus was another one. He hated David. Now, if you remember, there was peace in the land when Solomon was reigning. He had adversaries, but they were still on the periphery. They were on the periphery, and they would wind up causing his family some trouble down the road. And then another adversary rose up. We see this at the end of the 11th chapter, and his name was Jeroboam. And he actually came from from Solomon's servants. He was one of Solomon's servants. He was a valiant warrior, and he was really highly esteemed because he was appointed as a leader over the forced labor. This guy had an encounter with a prophet named Ahijah. Okay, and he prophesied over him. And if you read it, you saw what happened. He took this new robe that he had on, and he tore it into pieces, and he told him what was going to happen, that you're going to wind up being king. But he also warned him. It was a prophetic warning straight from God to Jeroboam, and he says, you know what? You better do what God tells you to do. Now, in 1 Kings 12, you read this week, and you examined it some of your studies, and we'll do a lot more detail on it next week. And so we're not going to do a lot of detail right now. But just to remember what the big picture is right here. God tore the kingdom away from Solomon's son, Rehoboam. Rehoboam wound up over the southern part. Jeroboam became the king of Israel, the northern part. Rehoboam ruled over Judah. And God kept his promise, and he took the greatest kingdom that had ever been, and he split in two because of disobedience. Like I said, we'll look at it more next week in detail as to how that came about and the disobedience that occurred. As for right now, just remember a couple things right here. God granted Solomon what he asked for, tremendous wisdom, of such a degree that the Queen of Sheba came, who probably was very wise and thought that she was and had all the riches in the world, and when she came there, she realized that her wisdom and her riches was nothing to be compared. And yet, because Solomon's heart was turned away, caused by his wives, turned to other gods, and he started worshiping other gods, there's tremendous problems that arise out of this. We'll see that more in subsequent lesson. In the meantime, I'm Dale from the Precept classes in Coleman. I thank you so much for being with us, and I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.